Marissa?
Sorry, guys, just give me a second.
Thank you.
Marissa, we're not able to hear. Can you maybe just share with sound, reshare with sound? Just 2 seconds, we're trying to get a hold of Marissa. There we go. She'll just reshare now with sound. In the meantime, thanks to everyone's joining. I see that quite a few people are here, including Tandiwe. Hi, Tandiwe.
Hello, Louise.
Apologies, everybody. I don't know. It was playing on another screen. So Louisa, you didn't see it.
We saw it, but we couldn't hear it. So
Oh, okay.
without sharing-
Apologies. Can I please start again for you guys?
Sure, please, thank
Okay.
you.
I've spent the last couple of years traveling around the world, giving talks to big corporations and little bitty startups, and lots of leadership teams and women's groups. And what I've been talking to people about, I've been trying really hard to convince people that we can change the way we work. But every time I do a talk, somebody comes backstage or follows me off stage and says, you know, I'm so inspired by what you say. It's so great. It makes so much sense, but we can't. We can't because we're regulated. We can't because our CFO says we can't do it. We can't because we're in Europe. We can't because we're a service industry. We can't because we're a nonprofit. And then last year came the pandemic. And the pandemic changed everything all over the world. Service people started realizing that they had to suit up and wear masks and take temperatures and wash their hands. We had to start standing 6 feet apart in lines. We started working from home. We started working virtually. And we started learning all kinds of things because we had to. All that muscle around innovation and flexibility and creativity that we didn't think we had all along. And we now have realized that we can. So what have we learned? I mean, what did we learn right away? First of all, we learned we're not family. The family is the toddler walking around behind you in the Zoom call with the pet. The family is somebody needing their diaper changed. The family is making sure you're taking care of your mom. That's your family. This is your team. And we've also learned that that separation between family and work is become this balancing act. And that when we used to say, well, this is my work home and this is my family home, and those are two completely different things, for many of us, it's exactly the same thing. You're no longer at home and at work. For many of us, work is at home and the home is and it's confusing, and it's creating a whole different level of complexity and coordination, so that we understand that it's easier actually to work when we can separate the work that we do as a team from the work that we do in our family. Furthermore, in order to be able to do all that, we have to recognize that we're all adults. And here's the deal about adults. Adults have responsibilities, adults have obligations, adults have things that they have to commit to. And do you know that every single person that works for you, from the shop floor to the executive suite, is a grown-up? But we have been operating as if they aren't. We operate as if only the smart adults are the people who are at the C-suite. And as we move through the organization, everybody sort of gets a little dumbed down and the rules get a lot stricter and we have to have more control. And the truth is, everybody's a grown-up. We can see it now. Everybody has all of these things to figure out and coordinate. And so now we're expecting from people adult behavior. We're now focusing on the results that matter, not the work. And the way we track it now is we don't walk by and see who's working. We pay attention to what people are doing. And I think that that has always been the best metric. And you know what? For the first time in my life, the concept of best practices is out the window. And you know what? We don't care what Google's doing, because we're not Google. We don't care what some other company is doing. Nobody's doing it best. We're all figuring as we go along, and we're figuring it out for our organizations, in our teams at this time. So in order for people to deliver the right results, in order for people's hard work to matter, it has to be in the context of what success looks like for your organization. So if we start to think about context, it's really important that we think about how we teach that. If we can teach everybody in the company how to read a profit and loss statement, if we can teach them what the different teams do and what they're setting out to accomplish, then people within their own small teams and within themselves can figure out what excellence looks like for them. And so then we can start operating relatively independently as a whole organization, because we're all moving in the same direction, trying to do the same thing. And there's a really critically important part of making that work, and that's communication. And everything about communication has changed. We tend to think that communication is this waterfall from the top to the bottom. The executives would tell somebody, and the next level would tell somebody, and we'd go all the way down to the shop floor, and everybody would understand what's going on. Well, it may not have worked that well then, but it certainly doesn't work that well now. So now we have to recognize it's a different heartbeat. What has it been before, and what should it be now? How do we make sure that the messages are clear and consistent? Because that's how people operate. That's how those adults who get the freedom and the responsibility to produce great results operate best, is when they understand what they need to know in order to make the best decisions. So that communication, that skill around being a great communicator, is something that each of us needs to get better at. One of the things we have to do is think about what the right discipline is for that. If you used to communicate to your team by walking by and asking how they're doing, or if they had heard something, you're going to have to schedule that now. It's going to have discipline. We've got to check in with the people on the shop floor to make sure they're hearing what they need to hear, because it's not going to automatically happen. One of the ideas I have is just jot down at the end of every day a sentence of what worked and what didn't work. And you don't have to look at it for a month. But when you look back over a month, you want to look for, wow, that was surprising. I didn't really think that would be as effective as it is. Or maybe it would be like, we keep trying to have this in-person meeting in Zoom, and it turns out that there's 14 people on the call and only 2 of them are talking. Maybe it's an email. So we have to rethink all of the ways, not just the work we're doing, but the ways we're doing it. So now I'm starting to hear a lot of nostalgia around the way it used to be. There are things we aren't doing now that don't matter. Maybe we don't need to go back for 5 levels of approval. Maybe we don't need to go back and do that annual performance review. Maybe we don't need to do a whole bunch of things that were part of the way we do business that just aren't making a difference. You know what? The way we used to do it not only is not the way of the future, but we're discovering so many wonderful things right now. Let's not lose it. We want to create a new organization, new workforce that's excited about taking all of the things that we've learned, using that muscle, going forward. One of the most important things that we can do is realize the things that we aren't doing now, the stuff that we've stopped doing, and not go back and do it again. What if we don't go back? What if we go forward and rethink the way we work? Thank you.
Without much further ado, let's hear from our panel of experts on what they have to say on this subject. I now hand over to Khotso.
Thank you for that, Tebogo. This one is directed to Solofelo. So Solofelo, please tell me, how has COVID changed the way women, especially mothers, integrate their work and life?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the question, Khotso. In our line of work, I just want to speak a bit more personally in our line of work in the police, where during the COVID era, we are essential services. So we came to work and we came on a rotational basis, because obviously, because of COVID, not everyone could be in the building at the same time, you know, so there was a lot of rotation where the one group came in at this time and the one group came in at the next time. And once the Disaster Management Act gave everybody the all clear in the country, essential services went back to work fully. But remember, during COVID, the COVID era, there was a lot of communication online, like the meetings we have on Teams and on Zoom, and you're on rotation at home, but you're working from home. You come into the office and you're working in the office. Now, post-COVID, the online did not go away. It stayed. And for us females, I would say it made things so much easier for women, especially when it came to the family life. During that hybrid situation for us, where you spend more time with the kids, you do homeworks with them, you basically just work around and schedule your work life and just decide that I'm going to work at this specific period, push in the evening and do what I need to do, spend more time with them during the day. You know, there's a more flexibility. But the disadvantage of that is that you find yourself working more hours, putting in more hours, because again of the guilt of I spend 2 hours doing homework, I spend this doing that. Now that's what happened a lot during the COVID era. Now, post-COVID for us in government, so to speak, we came back to work fully every day, but the meetings and the onlines did not stop after hours. So there has been quite a shift of, during COVID, it was more of work-life integration where you could integrate and just, you know, make things work. And post-COVID, now we have to go back to work-life balance, where you have your work life and it stays as is, and you will do your things during the weekend. But at the same time, you're still expected to continue working after hours if there's a meeting scheduled at 4. It's online. You leave the office at 3, you get home, you log on to the meeting. And I think for us, it has had sort of a negative effect because there's been a lot of work stress, a lot of burnout, you know, a lot of pressure, because with us in government, I feel like we're doing both. We are at work every day, but we're still expected to do the whole hybrid working from home thing that other companies are doing. So it has had quite a bit of an impact, where some people thrive in it, because some people work 24 hours or they believe to want to work 24 hours. But for mothers, it has been quite challenging because you come to work from 8 to 4. and then you have a meeting at 5 or at 4:30. So you get home and you log on to a meeting. So I would say from that perspective, post-COVID, there's been quite some challenges with mothers, especially in the government space.
Thank you for that, Solofelo.
Kate, this question is for you. So what would you say are the greatest challenges that women faced during COVID in balancing their work and life?
Thanks for the question. Look, I think we all remember, all South Africans remember March 2020 when Cyril Ramaphosa declared his national state of disaster, and it was really a very new thing for South Africa. Because, you know, we don't have things like, you know, earthquakes and a lot of natural disasters. So it was something that was very different. And it was different to things like, you know, we've had swine flu and we've had avian flu and those sort of fairly serious diseases, but it's never been declared as a pandemic. So it was very different for us. Of the entire infections in South Africa, 56% of those were women, so a high infection rate, and 67% of all what we call essential workers, and particularly those in the healthcare industry, 67% of those were women as well. So definitely a higher rate of infection amongst women. Women are also generally seen as nurturers. They are generally seen as the ones who look after the family, who take care of the household. And yet we still do jobs similar to men. You know, we also have to work the 8 to 5 job, many of us, and then balancing that act between what we do at home and then what we do in the workplace. So I agree that moving to sort of a hybrid type of working, or when we weren't allowed in the office, moving to kind of an online working pattern definitely did help. But one of the things, and this was a personal experience for me, when my son, you know, they weren't allowed to go to school. So I moved him from an actual school onto online schooling. And what I found was that it was becoming increasingly difficult to balance my workload and then the demands of, you know, kind of making sure that my son was in his class at the right time. Because your domestic worker wasn't able to come to work, you've got those added responsibilities of you know, keeping the house clean and the laundry done and the food cooked and all of those sort of things. So definitely that's that added burden. Then I think so one of the things that we noticed and big things that were happening particularly to women were a lot of psychosocial burdens. So there was the risk of your employment, so loss of employment, decrease in income for some people. So those maybe not working in, you know, kind of the corporate world where things kind of just tended to tick along. Decrease in income because maybe they were working less hours, or maybe they were not allowed to work at all. A much higher risk of infection, as I've already said, you know, 56% of all infections were from women. Working longer hours, like you know, what's already been mentioned is that your job doesn't finish at 5. You know, you're online a lot more of the time. You're checking your emails. I mean, usually what we did before COVID was we would wake up in the morning, we would have our maybe a cup of coffee and some breakfast, we'd go and shower, we'd get prepared for work, we'd sit in traffic. So you have a lot more time to kind of just, you know, kind of get into that mode of, right, I'm heading into work now and I'm going to get into work mode. Whereas during COVID, and even now, for those of us who are still working mostly online, it's, you know, you grab that cup of coffee, but you eating your breakfast and drinking that cup of coffee while you're reading your emails. And then the other thing that became very significant and very concerning was an increase in gender-based violence. And this was because women were now at home with violent partners and more exposed to that violence. They didn't have the opportunity to kind of get out, to go into a safe space. They were kind of exposed to the violence more often. And I think what impacted that is South Africa has a very patriarchal society. Still in these days, yes, women have got a lot more rights, rights even equal to men, but it's still patriarchal. We are still expected to be the ones who do the housework, to do the caring of the children, to look after our elderly parents or grandparents. Research also showed us that in 2019, 41% of households were headed by females. And that's, there wasn't a male presence there. So there wasn't that kind of any type of assistance from a male to kind of, okay, you know what, I need a little bit of a break. I need to go to gym. I need to go and do some exercise. I need to do some yoga. I need to just meditate, sit in the bath. There wasn't that, because especially if you've got children, now you're doing the full-time stuff. You're doing the full-time looking after of children as well as home. And then you've got to balance that with work. It also with female-headed households, there's a much higher economic impact, and COVID really showed this. And female-headed households are more likely to fall into poverty and persist in the states during the pandemic compared to male-headed households. So that's what research showed to us. And then, and I think female-led households are still suffering from those consequences of COVID in terms of finances. People haven't caught up yet. Life is far more expensive than it was before. So do our salaries, which has been proven to sometimes be less than our male counterparts, do those salaries then cover us in terms of, the increase in expenses that we now have? Then obviously I've spoken about the cases of gender-based violence, and during COVID, it was a 10% increase in sexual offences. So I'm just showing, women did not have a place to go and escape that sort of thing, not a safe space. And then just some of the things that we found when we analyzed some of our statistics within Liberty of our female employees. So out of all of our employees who made use of what we call our employee assistance program, 71% of them were women. Okay, so yes, women do are naturally inclined to be able to talk about their emotions. Men tend to be a little bit more closed up, but that's a very high percentage. And it's because women were really feeling the burden. So things like relationship issues were a problem. Mental illness started to show up more often. Money management became a big thing, which we hadn't seen in previous years. Child and family care also new to the presenting problems, which it had never featured before on presenting problems. And then obviously with COVID, loss issues became a major thing, because we were, people were experiencing deaths of family members, deaths of colleagues, etc. And then a lot more sort of what we call high-risk cases were reported. So in 2020, we had 34 high-risk cases. Now, high-risk cases are classified as those where there's suicide ideation or attempts at suicide, it's some substance abuse, and then it's serious mental illness or financial problems. And those cases continued to increase into 2021 and 2022. They're kind of still staying at the same level. So you haven't seen that big drop that you would have expected post-COVID, where, they always say, okay, things are returning back to normal, but things are never going to be normal again. It's always going to be an impact on our lives and what has happened to us. Yeah, so I think really, the major things that we noticed, and the impacts of women trying to balance work life and home life, it was just exacerbated because of the fact that you really kind of didn't have that time to sort of escape from, you know, the chores that you need to do at home, kind of escape from your children, because, you know, they would normally be at school during that time. It was a continuous trying to balance that, you know, between what you had to do at home, your work, which was probably increasing in hours because of, you know, the limited time that you had to attend to work. So yeah, I think those are the main things. I see there's a question, Pendile.
Hi, Kate. Thank you for acknowledging that. You put that so well. I couldn't help but just feel this, I don't know, this overwhelming sadness, you know, as you spoke, because of just how much women go through. You touched on, you know, hitting up households, and during the pandemic, people, the gender rather that was mostly affected was women, right? So for me, I have a personal experience, and I'm looking at you and I'm thinking to myself, oh, that makes sense, right? So around that time, my mom was a midwife, right? She was working at Barra Hospital, and I remember a few years before then, my mom was diagnosed with a hole in her heart, right? So immediately when this COVID thing hit, my biggest concern was always, my mom needs to stop working. My mom needs to stop working, because if she gets COVID, she's not going to survive, right? And then I spoke to her, I said, please don't go to work, you know, but she was a single mom, right? She was taking care of so many other people. I would get so annoyed with her every time I would call, and I used to calculate, okay, this week she's working, next week she's not working. Then when she's not supposed to be working, I call her, Mama, where are you? No, I'm at work, I'm taking on extra hours. Mom, you can't, you know, you can't, you're not healthy enough for that, you know. And as it is, you know, she contracted COVID from someone who was coming to give birth, and she eventually died, you know. So for me, yeah, no, she died during the pandemic. So I feel so sad that, you know, she felt that she had to risk her life, you know, she had to keep going, difficult as it was. She didn't have an option, right? She didn't have someone who was going to take over if, you know, she then couldn't do the work. And then eventually she ended up dying, you know, so that really, really breaks my heart. But yeah.
So sorry to hear that, Pendile. That is a terrible, something
Thank you.
terrible to go through, so traumatic. And I think what you're saying is right. We as women, and you even see it with generally, if we get flu or we just feeling not well, we don't stop. We continue, we go on, we don't give ourselves that time to rest. And then there's the added financial burden. So if you are, you know, a single mom, I'm a single mom. Nate, my child still does have his dad, but the majority of the time he's with me. So I can't afford to get sick. I can't afford to not work. You know, those are the sort of things. And I think so many women face those challenges. So I'm so terribly sorry to hear about that. That's terrible. Solofelo.
Thank you, Kate. Pendile, sorry for your loss. She also just reminded me of something. If you remember, during the COVID era, a lot of organizations had new policies to say that if you're living with a health condition that could potentially be deadly to you, you were then given leave of absence with full pay. And Pendile just reminded me that a lot of women did not even opt for that because it was not an option, where the other gender took it gladly so. And we saw that as well in our organizations as well, where a lot of women would say that I cannot not just go, even though it's with pay, because they know they're afraid of the consequences. It's like we end up living in fear as females, because you don't know that if a promotion comes up, you won't be considered, because now they know that you're living with a chronic illness, so it just overall, I think it just reminded me of that, to say that the amount of fear that is also in us, especially women, when it comes to our careers and, what next, will
and
it
you
impact,
don't
will it go
know.
into my HR file? Exactly.
And you don't know that potentially, okay, so you stay at home because you have a critical illness or something like that, but it's exactly that. What are you missing out on in the workplace? Is there potential? I mean, that people are thinking, oh, well, you're not here, we can do the work without you. So, what happens after that? What happens if you lose your job? So, I mean, I think you're definitely right. That kind of fear, that stigma that is sometimes attached to, a critical illness. And those are the type of things that we also had to bear during COVID. Mampela.
Kate, I'm curious to know, has much changed post the pandemic from our stats? Or
so, Mampela, you know what? So when I was analyzing our stats, it's so interesting to find out that one of the things that is still a serious concern is finances. And looking at the stats from our EAP, we as employees at Liberty, and specifically women, you would think that we would be okay financially, but when you compare ourselves to the general financial sector, it's actually quite shocking how many people are still in financial debt, are still battling to make ends meet. So that's one of the things. And then obviously mental illness. So remember, there's that it's called long COVID. Yeah. And one of the things that has been identified is that people are now suffering from depression more often. They're starting to get more mental illnesses, chronic depression. So those are the things that are still very prominent after COVID. So, and that's why I say, I don't think things are ever going to go back to normal. It's this pandemic is always going to have an impact on us. So yeah, those are the things that I'm still seeing big trends.
Thanks, Kate.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much for the inputs, Kate, and the very interesting stats. I mean, it would have been nice if things had changed post-COVID, but I mean, like at the same time, we also understand the situations that people find themselves in. Some unfortunately don't necessarily change, but thank you for the insights, and thank you so much, Phindi, for sharing your story with us. I'll now hand over to Tebogo.
No, thank you so much, guys. Those were very, very insightful comments. And if I could just share also, I believe that we as IOPs have a good role in changing the policies of our companies, to accommodate women and put their best interest at heart. So I will now jump over to Louise. Louise, you have an interesting story to share about your work-life integration. Please share.
Sure. So it's actually not mine, but I do coach, and I see the trends in my clients and where they're coming from, specifically my female clients. And I remember speaking to Professor Karim when she was thinking about this lunch. And she just loved some of the stories that came out, because it was interesting to see how women were starting to navigate their careers a little bit more differently. So yes, Kate, I absolutely hear you with the single women-led households. In fact, it's increased to 42% in 2022. So, and then there's a beautiful graph that I'll share with the group, maybe on the chat, where you can go and you can literally see how the women-led households differ across provinces. It really gives you an idea when you sit with your workplace component, and you look at your staff complements, whatever, and you see how many females you have and where they're positioned. Just try and think about their outside life as well, and how that is now integrated into them managing their careers. So what the trend that I came across was getting more and more referrals from females opting out of formal employment, moving into a mix in virtual employment settings. So they would literally create for themselves gig work and end up becoming self-employed to a certain extent. And this would happen, right from, people opening up nail salons, but also coaching at the same time, straight through to professionals, social workers becoming life coaches, integrating the two, and then distancing themselves from a more formal work setting so that they can start balancing life better, or integrating their demands as women in this country within our patriarchal society a little bit better. However, I will say, if I look at the coaching complement that I've got with the client base, it is very different from a privilege perspective, because I might sit with one client who's opted out from a role in one of our big banks, which was sitting at a senior operations level. She was actually in such a high pressure job, and she just was not able to maintain that pressure, work with the boys, as she would say, in the boys club, at such a high level of sort of boldness required in order to get things done. And then she started looking at her, which I found so interesting from a talent management perspective, by the way, started looking at her salary composition and said, how can I make this up in self-employment? And she had organized 2 gigs. One is where she does consulting work in what she has been skilled in the mornings, and in the afternoon she signs in as a virtual work assistant in Australia. And she has made up her entire remuneration over that time. And it has allowed her to really start spending time with her children and start spending time with her husband again. And that's been a great relief for her. However, this is a short-term survival strategy for this client, right? Because as Kate so rightly said, is what happens from not just the survival mode, but from a wealth perspective with this person. How is she, what the natural career path would have given her, the traditional career path in this big bank, would have probably allowed her to progress and be promoted within 3 to 5 years. She would have had more disposable income. She would have been able to really grow in terms of wealth, right? And acquisition and taking care of herself. Now she has to have that conversation with herself from a self-employed person's perspective. It's a whole new ball game. She wasn't ready for it. Okay, so she's opted into something like coaching to sort of get that kind of skill set and mindset. Now, but think of it from a privileged perspective. How many females that had to opt into self-employment have the access to these types of sort of ad hoc social compact services outside of from what organizations offer, like within the EAP, of which Kate has said the majority is the female complement, staff complement that require it and that reach out and that need it. So there's a lot of complications right now in our society, and we're actually, I think, very quite rightly so, as you said, Tebogo, called on as industrial psychologists to put ourselves forward as humanitarian psychologists as well, and say, okay, so within the time that I've got available, how much pro bono time do I have available to provide coaching services to those who aren't as privileged to have access to industrial psychologists who happen to be career coaches, who happen to have networks naturally leathered, right? And with all of these different experts, wealth experts, to just get that woman a space where she can really think through her future, not 1 year from now, not 3 years from now when the kids graduate, but over a much longer term. Okay, so that's the one thing that I found. The really sad statistic that the one thing that Kate, I was wondering if you were going to quote it, that I saw is that when I looked at Stats SA, right, and they did a sort of study, they compared quarter 4 of employment stats for 2012 with Q4 of employment stats for 2022. And they found that even though in that decade, right, even though long-term unemployment had increased for men, the overall long-term unemployment was still larger proportion was still women. Okay, so we think about this now. Think about the economics of what's happening in our country. Sit with women-led households, which is sitting at 42%, a higher percentage of longer-term unemployment, which means that you're constantly seeking employment, but you're becoming less employable, right? Because there's this huge gap. And what I see, just from a different perspective from the psycholegal work that I've done in this particular decade, is women moving into informal employment because you have to make it work. So once again, is a survival career management strategy playing out here? Because women are not sitting maybe in the more decision maker roles, in the higher employment positions that we'd like them to sit in. So I think there's a real challenge for us in industrial psychology and in the Society of Industrial Psychology, right, for industrial psychologists, in terms of asking ourselves, okay, so we are the work psychologists, and our mandate is to help anyone, both from the unemployed to the employed spectrum, right, in South Africa. We're supposed to help all adults. How do we turn this around? Because for every household that you employ or that you create employment for, you know, there's the effects is just, you know, what is that beautiful word? I always forget it in English. Compounding, that's the right word. The effects of creating employment. But beyond that, are we equipping our women with strategies that are really mindful in the same way that their male counterparts have been equipped? Because I can promise you, in the very same organization, there's a senior project manager whom I also know, who has already bought 2 assets, you know, 2 huge two houses as assets, and is paying off the car and is looking after his family. So where is the equality in terms of providing the correct support, the correct guidance, and how are we designing our policies to really cater for that? Now, you'll see in the chat, I've dropped a little bombshell, right? Which says that in this News 24 article, that a 2022 report showed that in South Africa, women earned between 23% and 35% less than men when doing exactly the same job. So whilst we sit, if you look at the global reports, we seem to have quite a nice position in terms of the gender pay gap. My question is, if this is what's happening in our country, is it a surprise that our female counterparts are not purchasing households left, right, and center, you know, and creating assets for themselves and really creating a wealth strategy, noting that they head up households and noting that they are really educating the future of South Africa? So when I think back on my client base, what I do now as a stock standard is I've got a financial coach as one of my referrals, and it's somebody that is highly equipped in financial management strategies and in financial training, and then all my female coachees or women coaches have access to this particular coach when they need them. Because you realize that this is not something that's being taught or being made available or being actively pursued, right? And it could also be, there are various factors, structural factors that still play a role. I mean, the very fact that we describe ourselves as a patriarchal society should at least give us a pointer as to why we are here. But yeah, that's enough for me now. Tebogo, I'll stop there. And happy to take some questions and experiences from our audience and other panel members.
While we are still thinking about Louise's offer for questions, I have a question for Pindi. Pindi, would you say that women at lower levels in organization face greater challenges in achieving work balance integration compared to those in management positions?
Thank you, Khotso. Thanks, Louise. Thank you to the panel members that have shared so informatively. Thank you very much. I think that definitely not. I think that women need to strike that balance at every level. So I don't think that it's fair to say that, you know what I'm carrying is more than what another person is carrying. We have different responsibilities, maybe at different measures, but I still think that, you know what, women of every professional level, even sometimes women that are not working and people that are hustling, people who don't have jobs, people who are thinking of ways of making money, the beautician, the person who has to plait hair and do nails for a living. All of us have to strike that balance at the end of the day. You have to manage your household. Some people are wives, some people are mothers, some people don't have those responsibilities, but at the end of the day, you still need to strike a balance, right? So I don't think that that's a fair statement at all to say, you know, this person has more. For example, I'll give you an example. I work in a hybrid situation, right? So most of the time I'm able to navigate, right? And say, okay, at this time, I'm going to be at home. At this time, I'm going to start my work. And then someone else has to be at the office from 9 to 5, right? Trust me, their life is not easier than mine. I don't think my life is easier than theirs, right? And then someone who's senior to me, all right, they're a family, they're part of a family, they're mothers, they're wives, they're responsible for, you know, your load at the end of the day, and you know what you're struggling with at the end of the day. So I don't think that it's fair to think that someone else's burden may be more than someone else's at the end of the day. I don't think that's fair. I think that women everywhere, you know what, I think women are champions. Listening to what everybody else has said, I remember when I was younger, I don't think I would have appreciated the journey that my mom went through. You know, had I not become a mom as well, I looked and I said, oh my God, how did you do it, mom? And someone said to me, oh my God, Pindi, you're doing well, you're doing well. You don't feel like you're doing well. You don't feel like you're doing well. You don't feel like you're a good mom. In fact, most of the time you're second guessing yourself. You're thinking, how can I take on so much? You know, I work during the week. On weekends, I teach online. I'm thinking to myself, my head is so busy with everything I'm responsible for. There's no time to stop and think, well done, Pindi, you know. If anything, I'm just wondering, am I doing the right thing? Am I not, you know, making a mistake somewhere? So I think that you can never cap, you know, and say, okay, Pindi, you stop here, and then someone else goes on and they're doing better. I think all of us as women, I mean, women are champions. I have to say it again. I'm so inspired by listening to everybody and how we just keep going through it all. You know, the stats that Louise spoke about, we can hear this today, but tomorrow, you know, work continues and we keep going, we keep soldiering on, you know, as women. And I think for that, we really deserve a mighty, mighty hand of applause because we're doing good. I think so. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Pindi. You can go on and ask a question. I see a raised hand.
Almin, hi.
Almin, yes.
Sorry, I just want to make a comment. We are in a services business, so mostly you find that if a person has a set number of tasks every day to complete, I'm thinking of people like a mechanic in the motor industry where they service a car. They get a job card and maybe eight cars to service or 4 cars to service during the day. So there's a beginning and the end, and there are 4 cars to service, and that is it. But ours is like a pipeline that's it's a continuous process. And I think one of our challenges is also to prioritize, is to, you know, what should be done today, and set that as your target for the day. Because I've really found with myself, you know, unless you do that, you will work around the clock because you never feel you are ahead of it. And in that whole process, one has to also factor in time for marketing and, you know, engage with clients on social media, because that is part of your positioning in the market. But we tend to jump in. I know for myself, you know, I feel I'm snowed under and I jump in and I just start with my task list. And if it's more strategic planning for the day, it really involves to prioritize and to find time for marketing, engaging with clients, trying to find new prospective clients, etc.
Oh,
Thank you.
Almeen. I think that's a lovely share that you did. And I think,
Mhm.
you know, you're really talking the self-employed person's language, right? Because this is the thing about being in the services industry. It really creates a scenario where you have to sit in a situation where you have to ask someone, so how do you even price your time? Because and that's now going beyond what we do as industrial psychologists, but just, you know, our clients, like really start coaching them around thinking about these things, because all of that took your time and it has to be factored into your hourly rate. And it's small things like this that we could be, you know, presenting on and making our clients aware of, that I think sometimes goes by the wayside, because the assumption is that people just know and understand. So I hear you a million times over with your comments, and thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Pseudo fellow, I see your raised hand.
Yes, thank you. I couldn't agree with her more, you know, and I'm agreeing with Pindi as well. We are champions, like there's no if and buts. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think another thing that we need to do, you know, the Tebogo spoke about policies, but more on a human side of things that can't be written down. We need boundaries. We need boundaries, because women and men that the employer, let me put it like that, the employer does not have boundaries. The employer will schedule a meeting for 7 p.m. and you're a mom. And 7 p.m. I'm bathing that little person and trying to put them to bed, you know, and when they schedule that meeting at that point in time, we tend not to have boundaries, and we tend not to speak up, and you just take it as is and to say, okay, I'll be available, and you're going to try, as the champion that you are, to just juggle everything all at once and to try make it work, which leads to so many mental health issues that we suffer as females, because you end up juggling so much more than you really should have, because we lack to establish the boundaries and to say that this is what I can do. This is what I can offer you. And I'm not saying I'm not a hard worker. I'm going to put in the work. I'm going to work hard and do what is expected of me and go the extra mile if need be. But this is my stop sign. This is where I get home, and this is my family time. You know, I remember, I don't know if you guys remember, there was a WhatsApp going on about that sound of a meeting, a Teams meeting, where that lady says that she keeps on hearing it, and, you know, and she's in a therapy session. There was a whole video circulating on that. And it was funny. But in our space here in the employee health and wellness sector, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing people coming and suffering mental health issues because of that specific sound, because of knowing that now even worse, because our phones are that smart, I don't even need to log on. I have the app and you can make the call and it will link me with you. You know, so we need to set boundaries, because like Kate said, there's so much more that we're doing as women. It's not just the work, our family life.
Yeah.
So we need boundaries. Otherwise, the stats will continue to go up, and we are going to sit in a position where we're now defending ourselves against mental health issues that were brought on upon by things that could have been prevented.
Thank you for that, Tsolo. Very insightful. We all need boundaries, because without boundaries, we are going to work forever. You know, we are not going to stop. I'll now hand over to Nakane. Nakane?
Thanks, Khotso. So hearing all of the insights and the information shared by the panel members, I'd like to ask, so where to from here for women and achieving work-life integration? So this question is posed to all members of the panel, so anyone can have a go.
I think Tsolo started off nicely, you know, with boundaries. You know, we all need to set up boundaries, and then
I'd like to add on to that, Khotso,
Mhm.
to say for some of us in government in our space, remember I spoke about how we used to be hybrid and now we both
Hybrid
we're
and
working,
in person.
yeah,
Yeah.
hybrid, and because we at the office at 8 and we leave at 4:30, and like I think it was 2 days ago, left at 4:45 and I had a meeting at 7:30. You know, I think we need to, I'm going back to Tebogo again, where as IOPs, we need to start having different conversations with employers. You know, we need to start educating them on this work-life integration and making them realize the pros and cons of it, make them realize that it's got its advantages and disadvantages. You know, we need to start making them realize that if you want to see the best of me and you would want to see all of me come out and me give my all, which is what I want to do as well as an employee, is that we need to have different conversations on how to take care of the mental health of your employee. You know, not just burdening your employee with work, and forgetting that they're also human, responsible to have certain areas of their lives flourishing as well. Because now we're talking integration, we're not talking balance anymore. We're not saying that it's 2-3 different people trying to make it work. We're saying you're one person and you're trying to fit into the space and integrate all the spheres of your life. So we need to start having different conversation with employees. Our SOPs need to start being different now. Some organizations have started working on it, especially because of the hybrid situation, you know, but I think it needs to start at the top and filter down, you know, from not just the private sector. I'm speaking, you can hear, I'm speaking for government, not just the private sector. And I'm saying that because I feel like in government, obviously everything is slow. It doesn't happen at the pace that it should happen, like in the private sector. But as IOPs, we need to stand up and start making a difference. And this is also to the IOPs in consultation in the private sector. When you're consulting in government, when you're having these conversations with our government, have different conversations, you know, for the employees in government, have different conversations about what's expected, how to take care of their well-being, you know, so that you can get the best out of this employee.
Thank you for that. Kate, you are more than welcome to unmute.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to go back a little bit to the boundaries thing. And from a personal experience, so I have a manager who likes to work in the evenings and then early mornings. And she used to send me emails saying, okay, you know, and this would come at like 3 o'clock in the morning when I like to sleep. And she would say, you know, I need some information and I need it by 9 o'clock in the morning. And that used to cause me so much anxiety and stress, and know that if I don't wake up at a really early time and check my emails to see whether my manager has sent me, you know, some email where it requires me to do some work, that I was my health was really starting to deteriorate. And until I learned to kind of lay down, you know, and it's almost, you have to be quite firm when you're laying down boundaries, and you don't let people overstep those unless it's a real emergency. Because if you start setting boundaries and then you go, okay, well, this time I'll allow for someone to cross those boundaries, and then again you do it again. People then see, okay, well, you're not actually really serious about these boundaries that you've told me about. So, and I think the important thing going forward is that we need to continue educating females, but not just females. I think I'm saying females because they generally tend to kind of, you know, give in and kind of, you know, they're less likely to stand their ground. Not all of them, but some. I think it's important to continue educating them about how important it is to set boundaries. I mean, it's one of the things that we do a lot when we have our mental health awareness talks. Yeah, I mean, I just think, and my life is completely, you know, it's revolved to a much better state of well-being because I've set those boundaries and I stick to them. So yeah, it's very important.
Thank you for that comment, Kate. I think we all could use some little bit of assertiveness training. Louise, I see your hands up.
So true, Khotso.
Thanks. Thank you, Kotso. So yeah, I think for me, if I just reflect back again on the client base, I've had this very inspirational lady that started a business in 2020 because there was no work for her, and really turned it around and has now gotten into the business of becoming and recognizing herself as an entrepreneur. And I have to say, it's about, yes, boundary management, but then also learning what you do afterwards, right? Now that you have the time, how do you use it productively? So yes to all of that. Specifically, however, with the question around how have we influenced policy change, I don't know that there has been policy changes that I am aware of. I know that from a social compact experience, the clients that I have that are less privileged are certainly not feeling those changes on the ground. So I think when you ask where do we go from here, I wonder as psychologists if we do not have a role, knowing what we know about the mental health state of South Africa, knowing that the second wave of mental health or mental illness and ill health issues are now really upon us. That could be a product from long COVID, could also be a product of being consistently unemployed for so very long and not being able to find a way upwards, experiencing compounding stress at work, right, and balancing that with life. So knowing all of that, where have we as a group of psychologists, where have we positioned ourselves and really approached government on a national level to say, what are we going to do about policies here? We cannot expect, I suppose, in a way, our other counterparts, so that's the clinical and counseling psychologists, to do that alone. We need to, as a whole, start really representing the issue, presenting and quantifying issues, which we actually can do from a psycholegal perspective. We do it all the time. We quantify the effects of loss of employment over time on one's career path. We look at the effects of, the psychological effects of consistent unemployment and underemployment with effects like, or the compounding effects of a mental health issue on a person's ability to really bounce back into a more productive career path. These things are things that we do, but I'm not really sure that at a national level we're affecting policy change. And I think that's maybe the next thing that we're tasked with, is to say, okay, we had, a COVID, a good response to COVID. Now, what will be the response to unemployment and underemployment of women in South Africa, noting the stats that we see here, noting that these are the mothers of the next generation of people in South Africa that, will go through, school, and where is their example of employment and how to advance, those generations. Also noting, by the way, that when I looked at the stats, some of these women do not live in single generation households. There might be multiple generations of women in the same household trying to keep the household together. And we really could look at, for instance, I think it's a Northwest province. There's a professor there, his name is Professor Sebastian Rothman. And he always used to speak about bringing light to darkness, really seeing, okay, as an industrial psychologist or as somebody who is specializing in work psychology, how can we use what we do to inspire change in spaces of unemployment? And I'm seeing some of his work play out in the way industrial psychologists have embraced humanitarian psychology. So there's a lot of industrial psychologists now in the NGO space actually spending their time and spending their careers, capital, if you will, on really creating career counseling sessions, career counseling strategy sessions, getting NGO or getting corporate investment into NGO in order to really start fueling and understanding the, I almost want to say generational impacts of us not addressing this in the form of a social compact. But now my question is, how are we doing that for women? And it's a question that I don't have an answer for. It's just something that I think we should be aspiring to maybe work towards as a group.
No, thank you so much, Louise. I think I share the same sentiments with you. I worked for a year and a half at an NGO space where the focus was on empowering young women in the townships. And I went out there and found them jobs. And I can proudly say that some of them, they were the first in the family to have an income. Some have started their own small businesses that are doing very, very well. So for me, it was more than a job, but making impact in someone's life. Yeah. So thank you so much for that. Do we have any more comments from our audience members? I would like to open that platform to them as well. Anyone from our panel members? Khozo Nakane, is there anything that you would like to share as closing remarks for this session?
From my side, during the course of a week, I attended this training online where the presenter said something interesting. He said that we in the wellness space, what tends to happen is that management, beats people up in a way. They keep on punching the employees in the face. And once they've done that, they bring employees to us and say, fix him, make him more resilient, make him be able to take more punches, So we end up, we don't take a preventative stance, we rather on a more curative stance. So, I think it would be beneficial for everyone if we could maybe try to think of, see us as more of preventers than curers, So I think that I would like to close with that.
No, definitely.
That's very interesting, Khozo. I think from my side, I think now, again, going back to the question of where to from here, I think the question now sits with us in terms of what impact can we make, what can we do, or the changes that we can make to post-COVID, right? So I think, I'm just sitting with the question now in terms of what, as an emerging IOP, what impact can I make? And I think for the panel members as well, I think we're all asking ourselves in terms of the impact, right, that we can make. So that's my closing remark. Just thinking about the impacts that we can have, not only within our organizations, but the greater society as well, post-COVID. So that's it from my side.
Thank you so much, guys, for a very, very insightful session. I believe that we learned a lot, we took a lot, and we are still going to think a lot. And like I said, thank you so much for your inputs. And panel members, you gave me so much to digest, not only from the government side, from the private, sector side. So if that's all from you guys, I would like to close off the session, and I once more thank you, and please enjoy the rest of your day.